If you're like me, you may want to learn how to actually remember all the information that you take in through reading. Let's talk about it. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob. This is my mom, Karen, and we are your hosts of Books, Banter, and Beyond. And today we're going to talk about how to apparently analyze and remember things better, according to the internet, I guess, because that's where,
And
we
I,
pull
it's
information.
exactly, and I'm like really excited to hear this information because I can't remember almost anything. So,
There you go. So let's see if any of this actually helps. So
okay,
one thing, one reason why I brought this one up is that in a day where you basically have to remember everything, why not figure out ways to do so a little easier? Similarly to when you're in school and you're told to memorize things, there's ways to go about it, but maybe more effectively. So true comprehension, according to the internet, is going beyond just reading, but it's actually engaging in what you're reading. And actually, kind of a funny side note, I was on Instagram and I was watching a reel about a guy who said he actually would rather his kids read than do chores because they're working the brain in a way that usually doesn't. I think his kids are in third grade. But he basically, the rule is if you read a book a certain number, they'll do a big prize. But the one thing they have to do is they have to go back to them and tell them at least one thing they learn that can be used in like everyday life. So it could be a book about business. It could be a book about self help, whatever it is. So the idea of picking up a book and just reading it is great, but picking up a book and actually keeping it in you is kind of the idea of analyzing and remembering, right? Um, so doing things like highlighting, I know something you've taught me when I was in school with a highlighter, jotting down questions that you have when you read it. So let's say you're reading a paragraph and you go, hold on, wait a minute, write a quick question down. And then later on, you can maybe look it up, see how it compares. And then, of course, summarizing in your own words, which is something my tutors have always taught me, to see what you took from it. So after every chapter, write down 3 or 4 sentences to see if you can summarize what you just
and
read.
or another thing that I do, and I like to say that after you read something, you should be able to turn around and teach that or tell somebody
Yes.
else that, and that's what I do. I don't necessarily write down questions afterwards because I just don't. But when I read something, and I do highlight. I mean, I highlight in like two different colors. I mean, I'm like neurotic, and then I underline words as well. And I do think that there's columns in books specifically to write notes. I actually think that that's what they're there for, right?
Well,
But
it's a good thing you said that because the one approach, or I'm sorry, the approach of doing all this is actually connecting to the author. So, like you just said, you're teaching it. The author's job, in a way, is teaching you. So, if you
I
can
agree.
then turn
Yeah.
around and go back to the author and say, "Hey, this is what you wrote," you have more or less taken in what
Right.
that individual has written.
And if I can't teach it, and if I can't turn around after reading it, I actually can say to myself, I did not absorb the information. I need to, and that is why I have different color highlighters, because and it's a process. And I think I don't know, how do you do it? You used highlighters. What do you do?
In school, I used highlighters. I did underline. Um, we were told in class to write down questions, but that was more so to either ask the teacher
Right.
or for study purposes. So if we were going over, let's say, Shakespeare, they would suggest writing down questions that we think they would ask us
Right.
to study. So we might say, oh, maybe the teacher will ask us, what is the significance of this person? Or what is the meaning of this item? So they would have us write down questions in order to guess what the test will have. You
Interesting,
know,
interesting. And I tend to actually use something called indexes. So when I do read and I write, I find something that's just fascinating, or a quote or
uh-huh.
something. I have a notebook sitting back there, and I go in and I'll make a note about it with a page number possibly, and then go in the front of my notebook and in the
Okay.
index say the name, the concept or whatever, and where to find my notes in the journal. Again, I think what we're both saying is find out what works for you, right?
Right. And the second part of understanding is actually what we've just been talking. It's
Right.
discussing with others, testing yourself, and using visual aids like note cards or a book,
Hmm.
whatever it is, to basically play memory games. You're basically
Right.
playing Clue with yourself to see if you can remember what happened where, who did what, and what the purpose of it. And if you can do that, and for me, and I don't know what your thought, for me, I'm not so much saying you need to memorize the entire thing, but if you can come back and give, I don't know, maybe 70% of the story,
Right.
the book, I think that's more than enough to say you've understood it. If you are someone who wants to get the entire thing, then go for it. But I think if you can do about 70,
Do you think it's different, Rob, for fiction books versus nonfiction books?
I mean, yes, nonfiction is going to be your best one to do because nonfiction is purposely written to learn. So it could be a biography, it could be a science book, it
Mhm.
could be a math book, it could be whatever.
Business, it could be anything, right?
Nonfiction is really
Yes.
99% what you're going to be studying.
Right.
Fiction, I think if you want to do the same thing, it's more of a do you remember generally what happened? Can you name maybe two of the main
Right.
characters?
Right.
And do you understand the plot? That's probably the best you're going to go. There are some books, like for instance, we talked about 2001, where they blend science and fiction. So
Right.
you might actually learn more science than you realize. But for a general fiction book, for whatever genre, you're not going to be memorizing super details. You're just going to be seeing, hey, do you remember what the plot was? And can you name a couple people?
And
Like,
also whether you liked it or not, right? Whether you like the book enough.
sure,
And
okay.
right, to be able to say to your friend or to your son or to your wife, I just read this great book. This is kind of like what it's about. I think you would like it. And that way, right, you're also, and I think you only can do that really in fiction. I think in nonfiction it's facts. It's
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
right.
Nonfiction, you really can 100% memorize because all it is just a group
Right.
of information back to back.
Right.
But you're right, fiction, yeah, that's actually I didn't think of that. That's a good point. If you can show yourself that it was enjoyable, then you obviously took something from it. Versus if you just said I read a book, it was fine, and then you put it down, you may have not actually digested as much.
Right.
You know,
And we always ask people, have you read a good book, right? To give
sure,
you ideas. So I think this is actually really fascinating. I mean,
yeah.
because there's lots of tools online to do this, but I think sometimes it's just, and again, it depends on how you read your books, right? Are you reading them in a book? Are you listening to them? It's one of
Right.
the reasons that I don't like to listen to nonfiction books because there's nowhere to underline and there's nowhere for me to I literally have to read with a journal then to write a note and it's just too complicated. And
Oh,
I
no.
don't
Okay.
I know you do audiobooks, right? You like audio.
Yes. Yes.
I fall asleep. I can't
I,
remember.
I mean, I did one a little while ago, and it was space. It was nonfiction. Um, there were moments where I kind of, because I was also busying my hands, so I was doing other stuff. I did kind of
Space
phase out for a minute, space out, no pun intended. But for the most part, I because the chapters are in there, so
Right,
I could pinpoint what I thought was curious to me and
right,
maybe bypass some of the extraneous stuff. So it's not so much that I wasn't learning in those
right,
parts. It was, that stuff is things I might have already known or I might have learned in school. I don't really need to hear it again.
right,
But this part I've never heard. So
right.
let's focus on.
And that's when I go out and buy the actual printed book. If I'm listening to
Okay.
something audio and it's really intriguing, and I've done that with a couple of books. Dr. John Deloney, he writes all about relationships and not just therapy, but your past and your memories and things like that.
Okay.
Fascinating stuff. And when I read it first, audio on Spotify, for example, because I have a Spotify membership, you can get these books for free and you can read
Right.
them or listen to them. And if I get through to like a chapter and I realize there's so much I wish I could just, I go out and get the hard copy and then I do something weird. I
Okay.
listen and read at the same time.
See, that I feel I would probably get confused. Is it a matter of just connecting the
Uh-huh.
word?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
okay.
like all my senses. It's my hearing, it's my listening, it's my everything written into one, or rolled into one. And I tend to really, really get the information when I do it that way. Now that's only with
Huh.
nonfiction. It's when I
Right,
realize
right, right, right.
I need that book. I need to go get the book and start highlighting and underlining and saying, "Oh, I
Huh.
think I'm curious, all of you who are listening right now, how do you read? How do you do what we're talking about? How do you make sure that you remember what you read? Do you use tools? Do you
I would be
highlight,
curious to know.
right? Do you use like online apps? You use Goodreads, right?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I guess in terms of reviews and in terms of stuff like that, I can't think of an app I use necessarily for memorizing. But I know there's ones out there. I know because I know in school there's plenty of apps where you
Right.
would use to study. That's a good question. I would actually want to go into the app store and see what kind of information is there to help you.
I'm thinking it would be like an Evernote or a
Okay, so something just as easy as
And there's something else that I'm going to bring up right now. There are companies and individuals that literally read books. Like all they do is just read books, and then they
uh,
give you the synopsis, they give you the points, the high points, they give you all the different things you need to kind of
yeah,
get the sense. One of them is Nathan Lorenzo, I think is the guy that I subscribe to, and he literally does the work for me, specifically nonfiction books. And then
okay,
I do part 2 and 3. I see the thing and I go, oh, that looks really interesting. Maybe I should go read the book, right? First, I go see if it's an audio, and then if it.
right.
So there's a process, and I think you got to find your own way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it is listening like me, whether it is reading or listening like you, or if it's the ebook thing. I mean, if you, like I said, reading is one thing. Keeping the information in your brain is a totally different idea, and that's what we're talking about today. Doing things to after you're done, go back and
Right.
go, can I remember what I just read? Can I share with someone?
Yeah.
And was it good? Did I like it?
Right, exactly. Now, Rob, you've got fiction, nonfiction books, all sorts of things, comic books, you name it. The books are living in the next chapter bookstore.shop.
Hmm.
Go check it out. You've got some really great things there. And I believe if you buy $35 worth of books, and these are gently used, by the way, guys, these are not new books, gently used, free shipping. How cool is that, right? Good stuff.
There you go.
All right. So we love that you tuned in with us today. Make sure you check us out next week on Books, Banter, and Beyond.